Thank you all for joining us today. I just want to say real quick, this month was my 1-year anniversary of being with the Ivy Creek Foundation. And I just have to say, I have really enjoyed working for this foundation. It's a very supportive and just great all around. And so thank you all for giving me a job, and thank you, Sue, for being such a great boss. And with that, I would like to introduce Mr. Lorenzo Dickerson. He is a filmmaker / photographer and founder of Maupintown Media, with documentary films that focus on sharing stories of African American history and culture in Virginia. His films have been shown in various film festivals, broadcast on PBS, and used as a teaching tool in K-12 and college classrooms throughout the country. His own Maupintown Film Festival is held annually at the Jefferson School African American Heritage Center in Charlottesville, Virginia. And we are so thankful to have him with us today and very excited about his presentation. So just a couple housekeeping things before we begin. This is being recorded and it will be posted on our website in the next few days. Please mute yourself if you have not done so. And if you have any questions, please put those in the chat box and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. And now I'll turn it over to Lorenzo.
Thank you, Susie. And thank you everyone for having me. It's interesting for me. The very first time that I spoke on this subject in particular was an Ivy Talk several years ago, as the film Albemarle's Black Classroom was premiering at the Jefferson School African American Heritage Center. So it's a full circle moment to be speaking to you all today on this particular subject. So this is a lot of fun for me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and throughout the talk, if you can't hear or, if anything is, weird with tech, just let me know, please. I want to make sure that everyone gets everything. We're going to have, a lot of video clips that you'll be able to see and archival photographs and that sort of thing as well. All right. So again, we're going to be talking about Albemarle's Black Classrooms, really the history of education for African Americans in Albemarle County throughout the years. As Susie mentioned, my work focuses on African American history and culture in Virginia. A lot of it is very specific to the Charlottesville Albemarle area because I grew up here, and this is the area that I love. My films are done through my company, Maupintown Media, and then, of course, the Maupintown Film Festival, which we have every July at the Jefferson School African American Heritage Center. We paused it this year. We've been virtual for the last 2 years, but we paused it this year, so you can expect us to be back in place in the theater next July. So these are just some of the films that I've done over the years that talk about our history in this area. The very first film that I did was called The Coachman. That kind of kicked off everything and got everything started. It's really about the life of my second great grandfather. It was really an ancestry project for me to do that film and trace my family's lineage here locally. Birdland was kind of a part two to that. It's a short film. There are films about Burley's 1956 undefeated football team, the 3rd Street entrance, segregated entrance at the Paramount Theater. The most recent films are Free and Open to the Public, which is about the 100-year history of JMRL here locally, and Raised. Raised is kind of going through its cycle right now with film festivals. It's a PBS film, so it's running on PBS now, and we just were in the Africana Film Festival yesterday, and we have several screenings lined up over the next year. So this is the film in question, really. Albemarle's Black Classrooms. Really, this got started because, as I mentioned before, I grew up in Albemarle County. I went to school in Albemarle County. My parents and grandparents attended school in Albemarle County, and a lot of what I was hearing after I moved back home to Charlottesville years ago is a lot about the Charlottesville 12 and the history of massive resistance in the city of Charlottesville, which is an important story for us all to know. But I wanted to really know more about what did that look like for African-American students that grew up in the county. Was it the same story or was it a different story? And what I was able to find out is, one, it's interconnected, but also it can be quite different, that experience growing up in the county versus the city. So 1865, we all know, this very important date, emancipation of slavery. And here in Albemarle County, we had several plantations throughout. My family was enslaved at a place called Castle Hill, as well as a place called Turkey Hill, which is directly across the street. Castle Hill, if you don't know where Castle Hill is, it's in the Keswick area. My family still lives near Castle Hill today. We could pretty much walk to Castle Hill from our family home. And when the slaves, when folks were enslaved here and various other places, once they were emancipated in 1865, one of the most important things, the first things that they're thinking about is education. It was always something that was important to African Americans. So one of the first things that they would do is to build a school for themselves. And this school here is what one of those schools would look like at that time, directly after being emancipated. This school was the St. John Elementary School, which is right around the corner from Castle Hill. So my ancestors attended this school. My great aunt, who just recently passed about a year ago, she was 106 when she passed away. She attended this particular school here. Funny story, when I first started talking to her about going to school, as I mentioned, she was 106 years old when she passed. Her mother was 106 years old when she passed. She used to keep me during the day when I was too young to go to school. She kept my father and she kept my grandfather as well. And when I talked to her, I assumed that she went to the St. John Rosenwald School that is standing today. I also had two of my great aunts with me who are now in their 90s, and they assumed the same thing. But as I was talking to her, she said, I didn't go to the new school, was what she called it, which was built in 1922. And we'll get into that. She said, I went to the old school. And I had seen this photo at the Albemarle Charlottesville Historical Society sometime before, but I kind of disregarded it. I was like, no, that's not the St. John's School that I know. That can't be it. And I just kind of disregarded it. But when I spoke to her that day, it put me in mind. And I was like, you know what? That's the school that she was talking about. That's the old school that she went to. So this is the present day St. John Rosenwald School. So this school was built in 1922 to replace that other building. My grandparents attended this school. It's right next door to St. John Baptist Church, which is our family's church. And the building is still standing today and is currently being renovated and preserved and turned into a community center. So again, as I mentioned, this was a Rosenwald funded school. There were 7 of these in Albemarle County. This is the one that is still standing. It still very much looks like it did originally. It was turned into a private home at one point by one of the alumni. In the bottom right corner, you'll see a more present day photo of what the building looks like. Today, there's a little more construction going on in front of it because as I mentioned, it's being preserved and turned into a community center. But that amazing work is being done right now, which we're thankful for. And the photo in the top right corner is a group of alumni that attended the school. And this is an event that we had when the school was put on the state registry of historic places, and it's also been put on the national registry of historic places. So Rosenwald Schools, now the plans for Rosenwald Schools, now Rosenwald Schools really were partly funded by Julius Rosenwald and the Rosenwald Fund through the partnership between Julius Rosenwald and Booker T. Washington to create thousands really of better schools for African Americans throughout the country. And but those plans were public plans. So there are several schools scattered throughout the country that look just like Rosenwald schools, but they weren't technically a Rosenwald school just because they weren't partly funded by the Rosenwald Fund. You would have a third of the funding coming from the Rosenwald Fund, a third coming from Albemarle County, and then the other third is coming from the folks in the community themselves. And the folks in the community are the ones who actually built these schools. So this school here, if you're familiar with Ivy, Virginia, Morgantown Road, Dry Bridge Road, this is Terry School. So this is a school where my mother's parents went to elementary school. It is still standing today. It's a private home, but if you drive past it, it looks pretty much just like it does in this photo. This is one of the other schools here. This is Hillsborough School. This is in the Crozet area, not too far from Western Albemarle High School. You'll notice the potbelly stove on to the right there, which is really a very important piece in history in these schools. If you talk to anyone that's been to one of these schools, one of the first things they will tell you about is the potbelly stove that they use to heat the building, they use to cook with. One interesting story, and I will send you all the link to watch the full film, Albemarle's Black Classrooms. One of the alumni that attended St. John, he would come in the morning. The oldest boy that attended the school would come in the morning and make sure everything was set and ready to go for school that morning. And so he would walk to school. He lived right down the road from the school, and he would actually put motor oil on the floor to keep the dust down and whatnot. But he would do that in the morning and then go back home for a little while before he would come back to school. And but from time to time, he would come in, put that motor oil on the floor, cut the potbelly stove on. It might be a little bit too hot, and come back and notice that the floor is steaming, is smoking. So he'd have to adjust his temperature there. So this is what that Hillsborough School looks like today. So this is what it used to look like. This is what it looks like today. It's right across the street from Piedmont Baptist Church. So the home church for the Washington family and the Wood family and the Jackson family and others. So I just encourage you as you drive about Albemarle County, we drive past buildings that look like this all the time, that are, look abandoned really. But a lot of times this building that you ride by could have a very extensive history, and be important to a community. It very well could be a form of school. This building actually, my parents, after it was a school and before it was in this condition, my parents used to go to parties in this building when they were dating and dating when they were going to Albemarle High School in the 70s. So after you would have finished elementary school in Albemarle County. And the schools that I just showed you, there were several of those all throughout the county, these 1 and 2 room schools in various different spots, Whitehall and Browns Cove and all over the place. You would find these small 1 and 2 room schools. But after that, you had 2 choices as far as high school in Albemarle County. Albemarle Training School, which you'll see in these 2 photos here. We'll get to the others. This is actually a photo from Albemarle Training School. This is my grandmother. She attended Albemarle Training School, Sarah Maupin, and that's actually my company is named after her in her honor. She grew up in Ivy. It's an interesting photo for me because my grandmother, my mother's mother, is here in this photo, but directly to the left of her is my grandfather on the other side of my family. That's his sister, and a cousin of mine is all the way to the left there, Bernice Mitchell. So this is, a very important photo for me personally. And then this is a photo of my grandfather, William Wilson. So in these photos, my grandmother is in the 9th grade and my grandfather is in the 8th grade here. So that other option, as far as high school, as I mentioned, would have been Esmont High School. This is a photo of Esmont High School here, which was on the same property where the former B.F. Yancey Elementary School that recently closed a few years ago. Same piece of property there. This is where Esmont High School once was. If you notice, the image that I showed you of the Terry School in Ivy looks very similar to the design of the Esmont High School. The other school that would have been an option if you lived in the city, so you had 3, Albemarle Training School, Esmont High School, and then if you were in the city, it would have been Jefferson School. So 1954, another important year. This is, of course, Brown versus Board. And especially if you're not from the South, it can be easy really to think that when Brown versus Board occurred, that schools automatically desegregated in full, right? That everyone started to automatically go to school together. But that, of course, wasn't the case here. It wasn't in the case in numerous different places. So with that being said, we're going to back up just a little bit to 1951. And the reason being really is because as Brown versus Board is coming down the pipe, it's about to happen, there's resistance that happens, that occurs to the desegregation of schools in Albemarle County. And one way was something called passive resistance. A lot of times we talk about massive resistance here in the area a lot because of the court case that occurred, and Charlottesville City Schools were a part of that court case and closed for about 6 months. And this is about 1959. But something called passive resistance happened a bit before that, which is basically a stall tactic to not desegregate schools. So we're going to learn a little bit about that in this next video clip here.
The sort of white power structure in Albemarle County and Charlottesville decided to build a new black high school that would be for both the county and the city, and of course would be an all-black school. But again, they invested real money in building it. They raised the teacher salaries, which they were required to do by law. It wasn't anything they did generously.
At that point, Virginia was trying to meet the criteria for separate but equal. They were in the court, and so they built Burley and
So basically, there were 3 schools in this area that were built during that time as a way to meet separate but equal. Give African Americans brand new schools with all the bells and whistles, and with the hope that they wouldn't want to desegregate white schools. So during that time, you had Jackson P. Burley High School, Virginia Elmer Elementary School, and Rose Hill Elementary School as well were all built during that time period.
The sort of white power structure in Albemarle County and Charlottesville.
There we go. Just making sure I show you all everything. There we go. So, and as you can see, this is a photo of Burley. This is the first year that Burley opened, 1951. It's an interesting photo. You'll notice that Rose Hill Drive is a gravel street in this photo. So this is something that always stands out to me about this photo. Burley High School, of course, became an amazing place for education and athletics for African Americans. But one thing that we don't understand, we forget, we don't know about because it's not taught is the original reason why this school was built as a pacifier for African Americans. It's also a unique place as to why, you know, you look back at the history and you better understand as to why this Albemarle County school is uniquely placed right in the middle of the city, because both county and city students came to this school, as well as some others that came from Nelson and Greene. And of course, during that time, if you lived in Crozet, if you lived, you know, in these far out places, people would come into the city, stay with a family member during the week, and then go back home for the week on the weekends because of the distance there. This is a photo of my grandmother, Ann Payne Dickerson. She went to Albemarle Training School, and then that very first year that Burley opened, she went to Burley for that last year, 11th grade. So she was in that very first graduating class from Burley High School, 1952. So here we're learning a little bit more about what I mentioned about passive resistance.
You have white Southerners shifting to a strategy of passive resistance. So they stopped openly saying that they were against segregation. Instead, what they did is they tried to stall integration and make it as small and minimal as possible.
You know, how quickly must they implement this decision? So that was, you know, the subsequent year there was a follow-up decision. It was oftentimes called Brown 2, in which the Supreme Court used the phrase "all deliberate speed" to describe the process by which school districts must begin the process of desegregation. Well, all deliberate speed can mean a lot of things. You know, it could mean tomorrow, or as was often the case amongst many white-controlled school systems, it was meant as slow as possible.
You have white Southerners shifting to a strategy of
So, I mean, you saw Dr. Andrew Call there mentioning, you know, talking about these stall tactics. So, if you think about the timeline there, you know, Brown versus Board, 1959, 1954. Charlottesville City Schools begins to desegregate in 1959. Albemarle County Schools does not start to desegregate until 1963, which is 9 years after Brown versus Board, and they don't completely desegregate until 1967 with the closing of Jackson P. Burley High School as a high school. So you can see how long this process took to actually desegregate schools here locally.
that held sway for just 3 or 4 years. And then in part because of the Charlottesville case in 1959, massive resistance basically got declared unconstitutional, both by the federal courts but also by the Virginia Supreme Court. So that's when the state moved to what some historians call passive resistance. And the main key of passive resistance was keeping all the black schools open. So even if you couldn't prevent a black student from petitioning to be enrolled in a white school, part of the strategy was that if the black schools were open just for matters of tradition and comfort, convenience, most black families would probably still send their children to the African American schools, even if they had the option of going to the white school in the same county. It's also a time, this had actually started even slightly before Brown, in anticipation of this. Virginia invested more money in all black schools in the 1950s and early 60s than any time in its history. And of course, one great example of that is Burley High School here in Charlottesville, which is it's a magnificent building still in use 60 years later. So I think part of it was that was the idea that you could delay integration significantly by giving African Americans an all-black school that was closer in quality.
So after the Brown decision, and even after the period of massive resistance, during and after the period of massive resistance, these pupil placement boards would, at some point, would create sort of token integration. They would pick 1 or 2 African American children to attend an all-white school, and then would call that integration. But it was, at its core, one of the state's methods for keeping schools from
All right. So as you can see, the desegregation process was a lot more difficult, than it is than, sometimes how we read it. It sounds like it could be more simple, but not. It took several years to get schools to desegregate in Albemarle County and all over the American South, for sure. A lot of times we see in the news, we'll see, especially during Halloween and whatnot, and we saw it with our previous governor initially, where someone is practicing blackface. For me, as I was doing research to create this film several years ago, I was looking through yearbooks and noticed that this type of thing was also practiced here. It's practiced in other places during that time period, especially. And I was surprised, right? Because it's here at home. So I'm going to show you this clip from the film that's really, it's really of an image that I was able to find in 1962 Albemarle High School yearbook. The reason that's also interesting is because it's just the year before the first 26 students desegregated Albemarle County schools, and 5 of those 26 students went from Jackson P. Burley High School to Albemarle High School. So it just gives you a sense of the type of behavior and the thought process that these students during that time had to walk into.
Mr. Ned Haverly. I want you to know that I'm a ragged but right. Whole black and living like you people ask why. Porterhouse steak every day for my boy. That's more than all you rounders in this town can afford.
Well, Jim Crow is a term, it refers specifically, it was derived from a minstrel routine in the 19th century, a minstrel character from that age, which was a sort of notoriously racist caricatures of African Americans that were popular particularly amongst sort of white audiences in the North. And and it was performed often by whites in blackface.
And if my memory serves me correctly, the person that you actually see in blackface was someone that's a pretty highly revered lacrosse coach, I believe, at the University of Virginia at the time.
Gentlemen, Mr. Ned Haverland.
So as we talk about those tactics that were used and why it took so long to get these students desegregated in our local schools. 1956 General Assembly in Richmond, Virginia. This is where the decision was made to create something called the Pupil Placement Board. And basically what the Pupil Placement Board was, this was the process by which African-American parents had to apply for their children to go to a white school. So my grandmother applied for my father, who was at Rose Hill Elementary at the time, applied for him to go to Stone Robinson Elementary. So he would take a bus from Cobham, which is near Keswick, past Stone Robinson every day to come into the city, as I mentioned before, to attend Rose Hill. But in order for him to go to Stone Robinson, my grandmother had to apply. So this barrier also added to the fact that you only had a certain number of African-American students initially desegregating schools. So like I mentioned, the Charlottesville 12, the Albemarle 26, there were a lot more African-American students than those small numbers, but you would get 10, 20 one year, another group the next year, and over several years, then you would finally end up fully desegregated. Also an interesting thing in this photo, because we're here locally in Charlottesville and the whole Lee statue has been a topic of discussion for several years, is that there's a statue of Robert E. Lee in the back of the room here as the decision is being made. So here's a little bit more about the Pupil Placement Board.
Well, the Brown versus Board education decision was handed down in June 1954. It was a unanimous decision by the U.S. Supreme Court outlawing segregation of public schools.
The Pupil Placement Board was one of many different maneuvers that were utilized in Virginia and elsewhere. It was an administrative board that was first established, I think, during the 1956 General Assembly session, the Virginia General Assembly. And the Pupil Administration Board was this administrative board that would determine to which public school your children would go. They would make the decision on which public schools students would attend. Well, as a matter of practice, I don't have to tell you what that meant. It meant that white children would go to white schools and African American students would go to African American black schools.
Okay. So here we are, as we mentioned, 1956, the year of this Virginia General Assembly, where the Pupil Placement Board is developed. And these quotes here are these now locally infamous quotes that have really kicked off the school naming review process in Albemarle County. These are two quotes that I found some years ago when I was making this film. It's an article by James Rorty, July 1st, 1956, yet again. And I'll read them to you if integration is practicable in Norfolk with 39% of Negroes in its school population, why isn't it practicable in Albemarle County in Central Virginia with only 21%? It just isn't, replied Dr. E.J. Oglesby, professor of mathematics at the University of Virginia, who had served on the Albemarle County School Board. Not in this part of the world in the foreseeable future. This was also the conclusion of Dr. Paul Kale, the Albemarle County School Superintendent. White parents would not permit their children to receive instruction from inferior Negro teachers, and they were inferior, Dr. Kale said, citing instances of misconduct by Negro school principals. He declared that an MA from Columbia didn't necessarily make a Negro teacher either professionally competent or trustworthy. So, these quotes, it's important because one, these are coming from leaders at the time in our county schools, in our school system. And it points to their thoughts about African Americans and African American teachers at that time. I gave a talk to the school board several years ago called History as the President, and we talked about this. And the school board decided to review the naming of its schools to make sure that it matched with the county schools mission. So they're in the process of doing that now. I believe they're in the 8th of 14 schools, I believe that they're reviewing. But I wanted to make sure that you all were able to see these quotes verbatim. A lot of times people don't know where they came from and what actually they say. But yeah, the fact that they were inferior, professionally competent, trustworthy, or questionable for sure. So this brings us to 1963. As I mentioned before, an important time for the desegregation of schools, an important time for America in particular, as a whole. So you had George Wallace on the schoolhouse steps in Alabama. Martin Luther King came to the University of Virginia. The 4 little girls were bombed in the Birmingham church in 63 as well. And the Greensboro sit-ins happened during this time as well. And Albemarle County started to desegregate with its first 26 students in 1963. So this is a newspaper clip from the Daily Progress. So at this point, there were 18 students that were scheduled to attend previously all-white schools. In this photo, Geraldine Johnson, all the way to the right there. These folks are at Stone Robinson at the time. Geraldine Johnson had 13 children, and 5 of her children were a part of this Albemarle 26. To the left is Reverend Dr. R.A. Johnson. R.A. Johnson was instrumental in desegregating the schools in Albemarle County and working with the families and their children in pushing this process along. And that's the thing about this process for the county as well as the city. It didn't happen by happenstance. It didn't happen by chance. It didn't happen because it was supposed to happen. It happened because the community members pushed for it and worked for it. And that's why it took that long. If the school board and administration were willing to and wanted to really desegregate, it would have happened in 54 when the Brown versus Board decision came down. But that caveat, that with all deliberate speed, gave school systems an out. It allowed them to stall and to take time to make this happen. So kudos to the community members, the people in the area who really pushed for that.
and they didn't want to give us no, we had to go over there. And I know my Pauline went, I went, Reverend Johnson, Helen, the lady name, Jean Garland, them sister, she went with us. And all of us went over there, over to Stone Robinson to forget the school. We're going to stand over here till they put the children in the school. They thought they won't give us no people to fill out anything for them.
So they were going to stop you.
Just kept on sending you to the county office building. We went to the county office building. They said, no, they got the particular school thing at the school. I said, well, they just sent us here from the county office, from the school. They told us to come to the county office building. We said, no, we don't have them here. Let me just run you around, you know, didn't want to give them to you. One of the teachers, she, Miss Nicholas, I know we'll forget that woman. She's a black teacher, and she taught over at Stone Robinson. And she stands up in the front of the desk, her desk, and said, no, we don't have any people here to fill out. I said, yes, you do, because the man just told us here and here. We've always been up to the scanner. I said, move with that desk. So she moved, and I looked in the drawer, and there were all the people. There were the forms to be filled out. So I just took the form over there and gave them to everybody to fill out.
That was Miss Geraldine Johnson, whom you saw to the right of that Daily Progress newspaper clipping there. And she was explaining going to Stone Robinson to register her children and kind of getting the runaround county office building, back to Stone Robinson, back to county office building. And she was actually in that first graduating class in 1952 from Burley High School as well.
No. The transition for students from segregated to desegregated schools was, it was challenging.
The minister of our church was from Charlottesville, Reverend Dr. R.A. Johnson, and he came one morning in his long black Cadillac, and he picked up Ann Dickerson, Elizabeth Yates, and Pauline Young, and says, I want to take you all. And Pauline said to me, Bernice, Colette will be going to school next year, so please come on and go ride with me. But we were just like that. Pauline and I were inseparable. And so I was in the Cadillac with them. So Reverend Johnson drove on up to the Stone Robinson School. And during that time, it was a woman teacher, a tall woman named Anna Watson. And when Reverend Johnson said, now you all sit quietly right here in the car, don't move, don't get out anything, and I'm going to the door. So when he walked to the door, the principal at that time was Miss Anna Watson. She slammed the door in his face, and he turned around and came on back to the car. He said, she slammed this, that's the principal. She slammed the door in my face. He said, but I'm going back, because I'm going straight to Charlottesville, to the county school board. And we went there, and he said, I don't want you all to say a word. Just be quiet, and I'll do the talking.
So it's one of my favorite clips from the film, because I feel like you can really feel what that experience was like for these parents, trying to do something that should be a simple task, and is for us today, but because those people came before us and did that work. So another thing that if you're not recognizing it, I'll point it out, is that how interconnected the people in this area are with their experiences and whatnot. So the folks that you're seeing in these present day clips, talking about desegregating schools for their children in the 1960s, are the same folks that are in those black and white photos that were attending Albemarle Training School at that time. So you just listened to Ms. Bernice Mitchell. Ms. Bernice Mitchell is in one of those photos that we saw earlier on. She mentioned Pauline Young. Pauline Young is also in one of those Albemarle Training School photos. And my grandmother, Ann Dickerson, she just mentioned her. She was in that Burley photo that I showed you all earlier. So folks have a very deep rooted experience with the school systems from decade to decade over a lengthy amount of time in various different aspects of their lives.
And so the parents, as well as the children, had to have some sort of mental preparation for what was going to come, with that. So that was formidable for the families to make the decision that their children would be the first children to desegregate schools.
Just to leave from a school
setting,
that made you feel like someone, and then came to a school that actually made you feel different. So there wasn't no more images of George Washington Carver and Dr. King. It was George Washington and all of them there.
Even the history books were different.
When they integrated schools, brought us from Virginia Elementary School up to Crow's Elementary School, it was something that we had not experienced. And what happened was, me myself, we got off the bus, and some of the people that was hollering these names at you, we was like, well, what's going on here? We're just kids here, and so that is actually where I was introduced to racism, was in our institution, was in our schools.
They were frightened. You don't know. I really can't explain what a feeling it was. And it wasn't a good feeling.
So in that previous clip, you also saw the Jackson family, as I mentioned before, Piedmont Baptist Church, which is the home church for the Jackson family, right across the street from Hillsborough School, that defunct building that I showed you. So that's school where their family went to school. You all may know of Dr. Virgil Wood, who I believe he's given an Ivy talk before, I believe. He attended Hillsborough School, and he also attended Albemarle Training School at the same time as Bernice Mitchell and the other folks that you've seen in these clips. So as I mentioned before, desegregation of schools, Albemarle County. I'm going to show you a short clip of the Albemarle 26, those first 26 students that desegregated Albemarle County schools. A few years ago, we commemorated those first 26 students with 3 markers at the 3 schools that were desegregated. So only 3 schools were initially desegregated with those first 26 students. That would have been Greenwood School, Stone Robinson Elementary, and Albemarle High School. So 3 students at Greenwood School came from Virginia L. Murray. 5 students from Jackson P. Burley High School went to Albemarle High School, and the rest came from Rose Hill Elementary and went to Stone Robinson.
Well, the first day of school was pretty interesting. We, of course, waiting on the school bus to come pick us up. It was a different ride because it was taking us to the opposite side of the county. So my first grade year, I attended this school, Virginia Mary, and my second year was when we were informed that through the integration, we would be going to Greenwood School.
I rode the bus the first time, but I thought it was uncomfortable on the bus, even though there weren't as many white kids on the bus. Most of us all blacks from what I can remember. But I still think the part of riding up to the school was a part that was kind of had a little anxiety because it was a new thing. And first day of school as well, and then all the stuff that, like I said, went on in the 60s with the race stuff. So it made you feel a little uncomfortable when you put up in there, even though you knew that your parents and everybody else had fought for you to go there.
I remember there was some type of guards, I don't know whether they were policemen or just, people they had hired. And we walked to the auditorium, and that's when you found out where your classes were. So it's been a long time ago.
Well, to me, I felt like when I first walked into school that we were one of the first ones to come in here. We made a change. We had to pay the dues for other students, for my son and sons to come to this school.
Where you had to do your work, and it prepared me when I left there to go to other schools. I was ready. Yeah, I was ready to whatever I had, I could do.
I didn't go and think I was going to have any issues. Again, I told you, I went in thinking that I know what I know, and I have these abilities, and I'm gonna do the work that's required of me, and hopefully that's gonna be enough. And it was.
And with our parents pushing, they wanted us to have a little bit more or something better than what they had.
So, as I mentioned before, 26 students, 3 schools, Stowe Robinson, Greenwood, Albemarle High School. The interesting thing is that out of those 26 students, 13 were retained that year. So after getting good grades all year, 13 of those 26 students were told that they had to stay back in the same grade moving forward. And I will send you the link as well to that full short film, First Day of School. And you'll hear some more about that from those students, especially Lewis Johnson explains it very well and really shares his experience with that and how it stuck with him throughout his years going to Albemarle High School even. So this is the marker that is currently at Stone Robinson Elementary School, and this is some of those students that first desegregated Albemarle County schools. All of these students attended Stone Robinson Elementary. So we erected these 3 markers all in the same day. This was the first of the 3. We had Stone Robinson first, and then we went out to Greenwood, which the Greenwood one is located at the Greenwood Community Center, which is right around the corner from where the school building is. The school building is privately owned, but it's still there. And then the third one is right at the front entrance to Albemarle High School. So lastly, really, this story is important to me for history's sake, of being from Albemarle County and having that history of parents and grandparents attending school and myself attending school here, but also because I have my own experience. And my experience is just interesting based on the history that we now know and understand, in thinking about how much has changed and how much has not changed. So when I first started elementary school, I also went to Stone Robinson Elementary through the 3rd grade. 4th grade, I went to Meriwether Lewis Elementary School. But then they redistricted the area in that western part of the county. And when they did that to reopen Virginia L. Murray as an elementary school. At that time, Murray High School was in that building. And that's how Murray High School got that name, because it got put in that building. So they changed it back to elementary school and remodeled it and whatnot. And when they redistricted, the line was Route 250. African Americans live on one side of 250 and whites live on the other side of 250. So with that being said, all the African Americans left Virginia L. Murray Elementary School, this is 1990-91, and went back to Murray Elementary School, which was previously an all-Black school that my mother attended. So I went to Murray Elementary School for 5th grade. There were 2 African American students in the 5th grade that year, myself and my first cousin. This is 1991. I go back 2015 for their 5th grade graduation. There is 1 African American in the 5th grade at that school, and that African American student was the daughter of my first cousin that was in 5th grade with me. Once I got to high school, I went to Henley. I went to Western Albemarle High School. My senior year of high school the racial makeup of the school was a lot different than it was my freshman through junior years, because I graduated in 99, and in 1998, Monticello High School was built. So the majority of the African Americans that were at Western at the time ended up going to Monticello High School. So that first day of school, 1998, looked a lot different than the previous years. And it was obvious to us students walking into school with that first day of school. It felt a lot different, for sure. I think at this time, I will open it up for questions. Thank you.
Mr. Question you can just ask. You don't have to put it in the chat box.
I'd just like to make a comment, couple of my comments. First of all, Lorenzo, you did a wonderful job. I appreciate your articulation, because you said so many things that hit my family, whether it's Greenwood, my grandfather's church, Piedmont Baptist Church in Hillsborough, Virginia, Virgilwood, and my mother are first cousins. So thank you for the great articulation. I really appreciated it.
Thank you. And I also put some links in the chat just now. So if you all want to watch that first day of school video, the Albemarle Black Classrooms, and some other things, you can feel free to watch it in its entirety if you like.
And I was just going to say, Lorenzo, that thank you for the first day of school. That's the one I haven't seen yet. And it's, of course, is so important. And I didn't actually know. I knew about the historic markers at Albemarle Training School in Stone Robinson, but not the one at Greenwood. And so that's equally important. This was just a wonderful sort of linear history of a very full, very full story. So thank you. It was fantastic.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And so I'll say one more thing. I have a lot of the historic photos of Albemarle Training School. They came, I think, through Gail Shulman to the Albemarle County Historical Society, but you have more.
I'm surprised I have more than you, DD.
Well, the ones with your family members, I don't recognize those unless I'm just forgetting. And so it'd be really wonderful to have all of those in one place. I mean, I know I've contributed everything I have to the Ivy Creek Foundation, as Albemarle Training School obviously has a very close link with Ivy Creek Riverview Farm. But just, I might be coming to you, Lorenzo.
Right.
Hey, let's be sure we both have all of these pictures. I'm quite sure you have all the ones I have.
Sounds good.
This is Karen Mulder. Hi.
Hi.
And I so remember hearing you the first time when you spoke at Ivy Creek, and you were just starting really on this journey in terms of making things into films. And it's just fabulous to have this narration and have the imagery to go with it. So this is a personal question, which is more like, in this journey you've been taking and in this research you've been doing, was there something in particular that surprised you or stood out or that you hadn't expected?
Yeah, I think there's been several things, because the first day of school video came much later than Albemarle's Black Classrooms, but they connect very well. And that actually, that video came out of wanting to put up those 3 markers, and doing that research to find out who those students were. And it just made sense to kind of to do a video as well, to really talk to those students. So I really enjoyed that. But the other thing really is just how small pieces have been kind of falling into place over time. When I first did the film, I knew about the pupil placement board and that sort of thing. I had learned about it, but years later, Dr. Shelley Murphy, whom all of you probably know, she's doing a lot of other research, and she just so happened to come across my grandmother's pupil placement board application for my father. So that was really interesting to see years later, after learning about what it was. It never dawned on me that you could even find that document, that it was even out there. So that's nice to have and actually see. And it kind of it literally puts it in writing, the work that folks had to do, that my grandmother had to do in order for my father to go to school.
That back and forth shuffling, just, ugh.
Yeah.
I assume you're working closely with Lucille Smith, who is now doing her next book, who did that wonderful, unforgettable Jackson P. Burley book. I hope everybody has seen that. It's fantastic. And is now doing the feeder schools, as you know. I know you know that. Just your 2 projects so wonderfully intersect. I'm sure you're working with her.
Yeah, I've talked with her several times, and we're send her photos of those old schools. And speaking of that, because you all may be interested, so the Burley Walk of Fame is in process. They're working with the Equity Center at UVA, as well as Mr. Jimmy Hollins and the Burley Varsity Club. So they're in the process of doing the designs and building the Walk of Fame that would be behind the school where the football field was. Now it's used for baseball. But in that process, there will be a series of short interviews, as well as a historical timeline that will be on the Wall of Fame outside. So the plan is that you would be able to scan with your phone, QR code, and you'll be able to see, a 2-minute interview with folks. So I'm in the process of doing those interviews right now. So we'll see. I'll have all that done by the end of the year, but probably maybe sometime next year that'll actually be up for everyone to see.
Well, that was my next question is Raised is a fantastic film, and I know you've just completed that, and there's another one in the works, and just kind of what you see in the future. And I'm going to put a plug in, as you mentioned Virgil Wood, and showed a picture of the Hillsborough School, which is hard to imagine being rescued at this point, but I know could be a high priority. And that whole Yancey Mills, Freetown, Hillsborough neighborhood is so rich, and there's so many folks who are still with us. Is that on your radar?
It is. It's one of those things that's on my radar after speaking with one of my favorite people, Miss Anita Washington. It's on my radar, but then other stuff constantly comes in, and there's like 5 projects going all at once. So hopefully I can get to that. I actually just spoke with Ms. Washington's son Friday evening. So hopefully we can get to that. Right now, Raise is kind of, we're everywhere with it. It's just, we're showing it all over the place, and which is great. It's going well. So.
And were you on our conversations with Virgil Wood as part of, it was an Ivy Creek Foundation, our training school connection? We had 2 of them during COVID. If not, I have them recorded. So I just didn't know if you had been on. Okay.
I did. And then we also, and it may be still up, but when I was with UVA, we brought him in right after that.
Oh, right.
We spoke with the Office of Diversity, did a virtual talk there.
Sure. Sure.
Lisa, did you have a question? Sorry, Jody, she had her hand up a little while ago. I'll come back to you, I promise.
No, I'm fine. I might ask later, but I yield.
Okay. All right, Jody, it's all yours.
I don't have a question. I have a request for help. So one of the things I'm doing in my retirement is providing services to small nonprofits that have African American resources. And I have visited Rose Hill Elementary School. I have been involved with a work day to save the Newtown Rosenwald School, which is owned by Mount Zion Church across the street. And I have offered to help in their preservation. These schools, I've also did measured drawings of Hillsborough, and I think I've been able to trace its historic chronology. But I've had resistance in preserving these schools from the owners of the schools. And these are abandoned buildings that are open to weather. They're deteriorating. We're going to lose them very soon without this preservation. I would love help. I would love advice. And maybe it's because it's the white guy coming in who is the owners who are African American are suspicious of. But I would love to make inroads with preserving these schools. I've been the architect for the adaptive reuse of St. John Rosenwald School, your family school. So any help, any advice? We're losing these schools, and these schools are monuments. They're windows to history, as you've demonstrated in your DVDs and in your work, and they need to be preserved so that we keep a memory of what happened in education and the African American community locally. That's all.
Thanks, Jody. Yeah. I think it's definitely important that we preserve these buildings. I understand the resistance for sure. I think it needs to be explained. Whomever owns these buildings probably holds these buildings close to their heart, and they want to make sure that within preserving them, that it's not overrun by visitors and turns into something else other than what they're imagining. So I think that needs to be conveyed, and really centering the community and the folks that attended those schools in its preservation, and possibly working with someone like Preservation Piedmont as well.
Thank you, Lorenzo.
Wow. Go ahead, Lorna.
Hey, Lorenzo, I just want to say thank you so much for coming back. You were so awesome when, as Karen referenced and you referenced, when you gave that Ivy talk, it was so important. And I think it came at a really important time for Ivy Creek Foundation as we were expanding our outreach and our desire. Some of us newbies, not like Dee Dee was already on it and Karen, but some of us newbies were just not being from Albemarle, just floored by what you and so many others are doing to tell the stories, to protect the history, to keep the history alive. And so I just have to say, a personal note, I've always considered you to be an Ivy Creek Foundation partner through all these years. I mean, you really are a partner. And Maupintown is a partner because, of course, Mary Carr Greer and her connection and her being so important to Albemarle Training School. It's just wonderful to have you back and to hear more about what you're doing. And I love that you're just throwing out. I just love what you're doing with, bringing things up to date. Because when you talked about 1991, when things were different, I'm like, well, that was just yesterday. Well, wait a minute, that was 30 years ago. But yeah, so things keep changing. And thank you for your hard work in preserving the memories and a continuum of memories. It's really important what you're doing. Thanks. I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And if you all watch the full film, you'll get some more information too about Mary Carr Greer in there, as well as Virginia L. Murray, Miss Joan Burton, her experience with Miss Murray.
Well, Lorenzo, could you just also sort of let everyone know about the subscription to your movie, Maupintown movie? Because I just recently got a notice of my re-subscription to it, and it's great access to all of your movies, and I think it's an incredible deal too. So I'm just giving you an opportunity to advocate that.
Thank you. I have it's a streaming service called Historic Movie House. So if you go to historicmoviehouse.com, or you can go to maupintown.com to get to it, you can watch all the Maupintown films, as well as several others from other filmmakers around the area, as well as some others that are throughout the country, have films dedicated to history there.
Thank you, Lorenzo, for sharing that information. I'm definitely going to check that website out, because a couple of the films you showed earlier, the pictures of them, I definitely want to see those and learn more. And thank you again for doing this presentation for us today. This was so interesting and engaging and informative, and so important to all of our history and the US's history as well. So thank you so much. I can't thank you enough. And I hope, oh, sorry.
No, just gonna say thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
We really appreciate you spending the afternoon with us too, and especially when it's so pretty outside. So thank everyone for taking a couple hours to be indoors with us this afternoon, and we hope that you enjoyed it and that you learned a lot. I just want to let you know that if you haven't visited Ivy Creek Natural Area and Historic Riverview Farm, we hope that you will do that soon. We do have a couple events coming up that I wanted to let you all know about. On September 25th at 1 p.m., we're going to be hosting a plant walk. On Sunday, October 16th at 2 p.m., we will have another Ivy Talk, and that one will be What's Up with Our Oaks? Ellen Powell of the Forestry Department will discuss issues facing our oak trees and what we can do to help. All of these events are free and open to the public, but we do ask that you pre-register, and you can do that at our website, ivycreekfoundation.org. And if you enjoyed this talk and would like to support what the Ivy Creek Foundation is doing in our community, please consider becoming a donor today. And again, thank you all so much for attending today. And thank you, Lorenzo, for presenting. Have a great rest of your Sunday, everyone.
Thank you.